Welcome everyone to the Next Gen 4 International Forum webinar presentation. Today's presentation on the nuclear workforce of the future, opportunities and needs for the international nuclear sector will be presented by Mr. Callum Thomas. Doing the introduction today is Dr. Patricia Pavier. Patricia is the chair of the Gen 4 International Forum Education and Training Working Group. She's the National Technical Director of the Molten Salt Reactor Program for the Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Energy. Patricia.
Thank you very much, Bertha. Good morning. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have with us Mr. Callum Thomas. He is the founder and chair of Thomas Thor, a recruitment, executive search, and HR consulting organization dedicated exclusively to the global nuclear industry and with offices across Europe, North America, and the Middle East. He supports governments, regulators, operators, engineering companies, equipment manufacturers, and research organizations in building and sustaining a competent and diverse nuclear workforce. His expertise is in attracting, recruiting, retaining the workforce required to build, operate, maintain, and decommission nuclear facilities. Having worked in the nuclear industry across more than 30 countries, Mr. Thomas has a global perspective on human resources and capacity building within nuclear. He is passionate about achieving inclusion and diversity in the global nuclear workforce and co-founded the not-for-profit initiative Inclusion and Diversity in Nuclear. He has also consulted for the IAEA in the areas of human resource development and knowledge management. He has been involved in initiatives for member states with existing nuclear power infrastructure, as well as member states developing new nuclear power programs. So without any delay, I'm giving you the floor. Callum, thank you so much for volunteering to give this webinar.
Thank you, Patricia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. And thank you, Patricia, for inviting me. This is my topic of passion, so I'm very happy to talk about it. So I know we have limited time today, and this is a very broad topic. So I'll do a quick introduction, then we'll talk about the workforce today and in the future to set the context. Then look at why you would join the nuclear sector. Understanding that there may be people in the audience here today that are already working in the nuclear sector and others that are maybe thinking about working in the nuclear sector in the future. The role of leaders in attracting and retaining talent in our sector. And then we're going to go to some practical advice and tips. So practical advice around career planning, around accessing international career opportunities, and around managing your career. Then we'll talk about some of the tools for networking and mentoring. And then any questions that we haven't been able to answer during the session, we'll come to at the end. This is such a broad topic, and it's really different for each organization. So I urge you to ask questions as we go along. I think it's great to make this interactive. We're not hundreds and hundreds of people, so please feel free to speak up and ask questions. There have already been some questions received before the webinar, so I'm going to try and cover those as well. But please keep the questions coming as we go through. So brief intro to Patricia. Kindly introduced me, so thank you for that. But my company, Thomas Thor, I founded the company with 2 other people in 2010. Our purpose is well, we believe in the clean energy future and the power of human ingenuity to create a better future. Not just clean energy, but the use of applications such as nuclear for in areas such as medicine as well. So our vision is to accelerate the path towards net zero with the mobilization of knowledge and talent. Our mission is building and sustaining the global nuclear workforce and the workforce in other sectors that are critical to the delivery of net zero, like hydrogen and storage and batteries, etc. We're very much a values-driven business, so we are driven by excellence, by credibility, by collaboration, and inclusion and diversity are core values to our organization as well. So we're, as Patricia says, we're working all around the world, and our absolute reason to exist is to support people moving and developing their careers and entering the nuclear and other net zero sectors. So let's start by setting the context. The first thing to say is that the data it's not easy to come across when you look at a global scale or global level on the nuclear sector, but there's roughly around 1 million people working directly in the nuclear sector, 800,000 in nuclear power, and then another 200,000 at least in other nuclear applications like medicine and R&D, but that does not include defense. So that's about 1 million working in the nuclear sector outside of defense. Then there's another 2 million people also working indirectly for the sector. These are people who work in the supply chain or manufacturing or services or supporting the sector. So it's widely quoted when you look at workforce figures for nuclear that for every one direct job in the sector, there are 2 other jobs created indirectly. And this is often an argument used for investors and for governments to support nuclear programs, because they create very high quality long-term jobs, and also they create an export potential for the country. So the current workforce of around 3 million is concentrated in about 32 countries. And these are mainly the countries that have existing nuclear power programs. Of course, there are people working in nuclear in many more countries that have either research facilities or nuclear medicine facilities as well. To set the context as well, it's important to say that the nuclear sector is built on cross-border collaboration, and it has a mobile workforce. So despite the security and visa and language barriers, people move around a lot. And well, you heard from Patricia earlier on, who's working in the US and has moved around the world for her career. It's very, very common in the nuclear sector. And when we come to why work in nuclear, this is a common motivation, that people are looking for a career path that could take them on an international journey along their career. And the cross-border collaboration, you'll also see many times when you read about projects and things happening in the nuclear sector, you'll see that the stakeholders involved are from many different countries and different organizations, and that multi-stakeholder working, multicultural, multinational working is very much a hallmark of the nuclear sector. There was big underinvestment in the nuclear sector from around 1990 to 2005, not just in the workforce, but in the whole sector. And that has left a gap, which we're now seeing, because there is a high rate of retirement in the sector. And there is this gap from this period of 90 to 2005, when people were not joining the industry. And those people would now have, say, 25 or so, 25, 30 years experience. They'd probably be at the peak of their careers. So we have this gap. Which means that succession planning is really important, which is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because it leads to accelerated career paths and huge focus in development. There is a lack of diversity in the nuclear sector, pretty much universally around the world. For example, when we look at gender, around 20% of the workforce are women on the whole around the world. There are some great examples of organizations that have smashed through this limitation, this ceiling, and are approaching 50-50, but they are the exception rather than the norm. And then when we look at other underrepresented groups, whether it's ethnicity or disability, for example, then there is generally an underrepresentation. But you see that across many other sectors as well. It's not just nuclear, it's across IT and tech and aerospace, etc. as well. And the final thing to set the context is to say that the nuclear sector is growing. There is a growing need, not just for nuclear power, but also for applications in medicine, etc., and agriculture. And it's a growing industry. And I mean, the new generations, which many of you will know far more about than I do, some of the new technology coming through is just so exciting for what it could create. And it's not just obviously power, it's also heat and also many other applications. So this was a brief context to get us started. Now, I thought it was useful to put up a slide here about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that are often referred to. And I think many people, when they're looking at what they want to do in their career, or whether they're halfway through their career or starting their career or wherever they are, they're interested in doing something that has a purpose, something that is doing something good for the world. So many people are asking, the first question is, what, how is this supporting the world? How is it supporting the Sustainable Development Goals? And as you can see, the slides will be shared afterwards, but there are 3 SDGs that the nuclear sector is supporting directly, and there's many others that it supports indirectly. But ultimately, I think many people are very unaware of the contribution that nuclear applications are making to our society and to the world. I mean, my colleagues and I, there's about 100 of us in my organization, and we spend our entire lives talking to people about developing their careers in nuclear or talking to people about entering the nuclear sector. And they love it when they hear about it, but they just are often unaware. And so it's building that awareness about the positive effects and applications for nuclear technology is a huge opportunity for us in the sector. So this, I thought I'd pull it up because it talks about where the jobs are coming from. So as you can see now, the yellow line is fossil fuels and the green is clean energy. So clean energy includes renewables and it also includes nuclear. Although some people don't consider nuclear to be a clean energy, but it is now widely accepted in the different taxonomies and categorizations around the world. But you can see a clear path here. When we get to 2030, whether you're looking at the announced pledge scenario, which is what countries have committed to, or whether it's the net zero scenario, which is more ambitious, the number of jobs in clean energy are increasing rapidly, and the number of jobs in fossil fuels are decreasing. So this just points to the scale of the opportunity. It's what, 90 odd million jobs by 2030 around the world, and of those, what are we looking at? 3/4 or 4/5 are going to be in clean energy. So it's a massive growth area. People want to do something good, but they also want to do something that is good, that has a long-term opportunity. So why join the nuclear sector? So the slide I am sharing here is a word cloud from a series of consultations that I was involved in the UK. So we spent 18 months talking to people across the sector in the UK about what is it they like about working in the nuclear sector, what would motivate them to stay long-term in the nuclear sector, and conversely, what do they not like and what would cause them to leave. But the slide I'm sharing here is around, why they joined and why they like it. And ultimately, the challenging nature of the work, the opportunities available. People widely saw the opportunities and the growth opportunity in the sector. Collaboration, you can see that came up many times. We talked about this with in that slide, setting the context with the collaborative nature of the sector. It's famous for the collaboration and for the support that people get, not just between different companies, but also within the organization as well. There is a hugely supportive and collaborative culture, and many people, whatever the career path you're following, one of the main motivations would be to work in an environment that is supportive and challenging and interesting, exciting, rewarding, that has long-term opportunities. And I think you see all those things coming up here. I'm not going to show the word clouds, the other word clouds, because the report will be available. It is available to all of you. It's publicly released, but some of the things that people felt could improve were things like inclusion. We saw that the diversity stats are not great across the nuclear sector, and increasing inclusion and the pace of the nuclear sector. And that's something we're seeing really changing. So actually, for every one of the issues or concerns that people have about this sector, we see them being mitigated and being managed. So I think historically people have seen the nuclear sector as a very slow, not so exciting sector. But now with the new technologies coming through and the pace of change, it's really becoming certainly in the energy space, it's becoming climate tech rather than nuclear energy. And I think a lot of the startup organizations that we're working with now, they see themselves as a technical solution to climate change or to decarbonization, not as large energy players. And I think now's a good thing to probably to look at this. When I step back and look over the decades, I noticed that in the 80s and 90s, everybody who was smart wanted to work. It felt like they wanted to work in banking or finance, and you can see why. Back then, markets were opening up. If you were working in banking or finance, you were doing something great for the world. You were creating this free market economy and driving the economies. But whether if you were studying chemistry or maths or engineering, a lot of people are going into finance. Now, in the 2000s, culminating in 2008 with the financial crash, a lot of holes appeared in that, and now a lot of people who are motivated by purpose may not see finance and markets as financial markets as the way they want to spend their life in their career. So from the 2000s, we then saw it change from banking and finance to tech. Since the early 2000s, it's really been tech. If you're super smart and want to work in the most exciting place in the world, you've gone to tech. And we now see that transitioning again. Again, there are questions around tech and is it changing the world, or which it ultimately is, but is it also causing issues, which ultimately it is as well. And I think we've seen like 20 years or 25 years where banking and finance were where everyone wanted to work, then 20, 25 years when it will be tech, which will probably continue. But now we're going to see the next 20 to 30 years, it will be around climate change and decarbonization. And this is where the smartest people and the most motivated people to make a difference will be working. And I think whether you're working in nuclear power or whether you're looking in nuclear medicine, you are changing the world if you join the nuclear sector. You're doing something really important that is difficult, but extremely rewarding, and you're working with a lot of people who are offering support and guidance along the way. So I'm going to pause there and ask again, if anyone has any questions, please do put them in the chat. I already see one coming through, so I'm going to just expand this, see if I can get it out. Okay, so someone's asking, yeah, what's the comparable salary in nuclear USA versus Europe? And then you put e.g. IAEA salary much lower than USA. Yes, so the IAEA is part of the United Nations. Those salaries are dictated by the United Nations, so it's quite different to the nuclear sector actually. But also many roles at the IAEA, you don't pay tax, so it's your gross pay is your net pay. But yeah, comparable salaries in nuclear USA versus Europe. The USA, it has higher salaries than Europe comparatively. So Europe, of course, it's different across different countries, but generally the salaries are higher in the US than they are in Europe. Which is one of the reasons why you don't get that many people moving from the US into Europe unless they're expated by their employer and working on a kind of a contract basis. But thanks for the question. Okay, now I want to show a few slides about attracting, recruiting, and retaining. So this is some of the nuts and bolts. Now I don't like complicated slides, so I'm not going to go through all of this in huge detail, but it's going to be shared with you afterwards. But I thought it was, for those either working in the sector or thinking about working in the sector, it might be useful to understand why people are attracted and what are the trends around attraction and recruitment and retention. So when it comes to attracting people to work in the sector, I already mentioned it before, lack of awareness is the main thing. And as I said, my colleagues and I spend a lot of time enlightening people about the opportunities that exist. But after 10 or 20 minutes, people think, wow, start doing their own research and really start understanding it. So it's more around lack of awareness rather than negativity to the sector. But of course, there are some negative perceptions as well. People worry about the waste, they worry about the cost, and they worry about the safety. But most of the reports and most things that I read are telling us that the main thing people are concerned about now is the cost and the waste are probably the two main things. But there are very good answers to these questions, and people really understand that. Again, another theme in attracting people to the sector right now is attracting those from underrepresented groups. When I say underrepresented groups, I mean you look at the society and you look at the workforce and you think, does it reflect society? And in many organizations, yeah, there's under 20% women in the workforce, and societies are pretty much everywhere 50-50, and therefore that's an underrepresentation, but it could also refer to ethnicity and other characteristics. There's a lot of work going on here of trying to understand how to attract and how to reach people that are probably unaware of the opportunities in the sector, and how to create a working environment that people want to work in. So that's a big theme going on at the moment. Yeah, attracting people from other sectors. And there was a question here about this from Tom Grice that came in before the webinar started. How do you, was around, creating a pipeline for future staff. And the question was around, when there are job roles that are very, very specific, could be an export control officer or a nuclear materials manager or material control accountability type role, which are very, very nuclear specific, and most people reading that would have no idea what it means, and no idea whether or not they're suitable. And the question was really, how do you attract people to these types of roles when it's very difficult to explain even what the role is, especially with considering the job title is difficult. So there is a huge focus on this at the moment, looking at how to attract people from other relevant sectors. And how to do this. I mean, there isn't really a quick solution, but it's a mapping exercise. So we may look at a role and take it apart and look at what are the component competencies and that are needed for that role to for that person to succeed in that role, and then looking at where they might exist. So there is a general, and we're going to come on to this in recruitment actually, there is a general movement away from hiring people just based on their skills and looking at their competences, especially in leadership. And all roles can be taken apart. The challenge here becomes when a hiring manager has a lot of pressure in their team, they have deadlines to hit, they have projects to deliver. Hiring someone who's not ticking 9 out of 10 of the skills and experience boxes, is a risk. And attracting people from other sectors means that we need to focus on competencies and then develop them into the role. That takes time, and there's a risk that it may not go well. There's also a risk that someone with the experience may not succeed either because of the environment. So there's always a risk, but I think making space for that, reaching out, and we have to go to the people. We can't expect someone to reply for an advert for a nuclear materials manager and make their own analysis on whether they can make the transition. We need to go to them and explain to them that the transition is possible. And I think that it takes a bit more time, but if you look at your workforce and look at people doing those roles, of course, some of them came through a route through from graduate into that type of role. Others may have come from other sectors. So you can look for clues as to where other people have come from. But it takes time to do that as an exercise, but it also requires an allowance of the people involved in that process. They need extra time and support and understanding to hire people from other sectors to actually make that successful. Because if that space is not given, then the default reaction is no, I need every single skill on the job description and I need it right from the beginning. When it comes to people to entry-level roles, graduate or apprenticeship roles, most countries are succeeding in attracting people for these entry-level roles. So there's always this competition for STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering and maths. But, and again, the same awareness issue persists where they're probably not naturally aware of nuclear. But now we're finding most organizations I work with are oversubscribed when they're taking in people in entry-level roles, especially if they have the right working location. The challenge can come when you're asking people to relocate, but often many big employers now are setting up hubs to employ, to have offices or locations in places where the talent exists, rather than asking people to move to remote locations. Okay, so when it comes to recruitment, trends that we see right now, workforce planning is huge, and there is a lack of certainty on projects and timing. When you're developing a project, especially, it has to be, the workforce plan has to be based on triggers and milestones not on timing, because it's very hard to predict when investment decisions are made, or when regulatory approvals are given, or when technology breakthroughs happen. And I think scenario planning is really important. It's very easy to say, but many organizations just don't do it. They wait, and then suddenly they need to hire, and then it's a rush. And when you're hiring in a rush, things go wrong. And the number one rule in recruitment is to prepare, just like it is in many other parts of business. If you talk to most CEOs, or if not all CEOs, they'll tell you that their workforce is the most important thing in their organization. But you look at the amount of planning that goes into the workforce, and you compare that to the amount of planning that goes into supply chain or components, then it's a different world. And we can learn something in recruitment from engineering, actually, and look at things like long lead items and scenario planning, so that when triggers are achieved, that some of the work and the preparation is already done. I touched on this a bit earlier about moving towards competence-based interviewing and selection. So rather than a list of 10 essential skills, we're looking at competences. And at Thomas Thor, we have an executive search division called Thor Executive, and we have around 30 competences which we are using with our clients. And normally there's around 5 or 6 which are really critical for that role. Sometimes we're adding a new competence, but normally amongst our 30 competences, we're looking for 5 or 6 that are key. And these could be things such as the ability to manage multi-stakeholder managing multi-stakeholder environments, including external stakeholders, the ability to manage transformation, could be the ability to motivate and inspire a team. So some of them are nothing to do with technology or technical skills. It's more about what are the competencies needed to succeed and to ensure the success of the others in the team within this role. And many people I talk to have comment on the fact that promotions have historically and still are in many cases made based on being good at the job. And if you're good at the job, then you should be a leader. But a leadership competence is completely different. And so moving towards this competence-based interviewing, even when people are being promoted, is critical. We are seeing a slowdown in international mobility since the pandemic, and I think there are a few more obstacles to international moves, but also an increasing reluctance to relocate. It's still happening, but not perhaps to the level that we've seen until before the pandemic. There are definitely changing needs and preferences, especially around flexible working. And we've all heard about the Great Resignation and the fact that it is the power is with employees at the moment when you're hiring. It's difficult to find great people. And therefore, the preferences and needs of candidates looking for roles are becoming more powerful. Now, we have to say that other sectors and employers probably have adapted more quickly than nuclear to accommodate flexible working. And it's not easy for some job roles within nuclear, which are site-based and have to be. But let's remember that flexible working is not just about location. It's also about working hours. It's also about the patterns of working and actually many more things. So flexibility in one person's role or one job family may be completely different to flexibility in another. And I think for each job role or job family, looking at what flexibility is possible, how to make it fair across the organization is the only way to attract people. But I mean, I can say with first-hand experience that many people are leaving their jobs because they don't feel there's enough flexibility, and they perceive that there is more flexibility elsewhere. Now, what often happens is they move elsewhere, and then they realize that the grass is not greener on the other side. The reality is that all organizations are struggling at the moment with this transition. And we want people, and people want to be together, and they want this camaraderie and this community at work, but they also want the flexibility. So there has to be a way that it could work for everyone, which is very difficult because people do want different things. But the winners in the across employers are those that are addressing the flexibility question. A couple more questions coming in from the chat. So is security clearance in the USA acceptable in Europe? No, every country has its own security clearance, but there are agreements across countries and regulators that make it much easier to get security clearance. So as an American, as a US citizen in Europe, most countries, it's quite easy to actually get that, depending on where you've lived in the past, of course, and you have to provide background information, but it is definitely possible. You also need a visa, of course, depending on which country you're going to, but it is definitely possible, and it happens quite often. Another question: is the recruiting processes in the recruiting processes of many organizations, qualifications are taken as a proxy for skills? How do you measure the competencies that you select by? Yeah, good question. Qualifications are taken as a proxy for skills, and also sometimes skills are taken as a proxy for competencies. So the key there, how do you measure the competencies that you select by? I mean, behavioral questioning is a good way. So many in our executive search practice, we focus on these normally 6 or so competencies that are crucial, and then we're looking for written evidence of when they have displayed that competence, and asking at, okay, when have you managed a transition? What was the transition? What did you go from and to? How did it go? What were the lessons learned? What were the outcomes? So you're looking for behavioral questioning, which could be in writing, or it could be during the interview process. There are also other measurements of competencies. So let's say often building an inclusive culture is a key competence now. And I would measure building and maintaining an inclusive culture. One of the measures there is by staff turnover. So asking someone who's joining a role, if they're managing a team, or if they've been managing a team before, what the turnover was in their team over the last 5 years, for example, is a way of measuring. So for every competence, there will be ways to measure, either with asking for evidence using behavioral questioning, or for looking at what the markers are of success in that competence. Final thing on recruitment is around salaries, and they are increasing. With a question about salaries are they higher in the US or Europe, they're increasing everywhere, and employers in nuclear are competing for the same rare skills and as many other sectors, and driving up salaries. So we do see salaries increasing. Okay, so some words on retention, and this was also a question from Tom Grice as well beforehand. The question was about employee retention. Lots of job hopping at the moment. So how do we address retention and keep good people within the organization? The first thing I'd like to say on this actually is that the world is changing, and society is changing, and the workforce is changing, and anyone who hasn't read a book called The 100-Year Life by Linda Grattan, The 100-Year Life it's called, and it's about how people born since around the year 2000 are probably going to live to around 100 due to advances in healthcare, etc. So when they come out of education in their early 20s, they're looking at maybe a 50, possibly up towards 60-year career. So this way of a 3-stage life that we've been used to for a long time, where you have your education, your career, and then retirement, is completely gone. And now people are looking more like a 5 or 6-stage life. You might do education, then you might volunteer for a while, then you might start a career, then you might retrain and do some more education, then you might start another career or start your own company. So there might be 5 or 6 stages, and certainly there'll be a need to re-educate on the way through. And I think we need to recognize that, because a lot of people criticize millennials, people from that kind of demographic, for not having commitment and jumping. But if you had 50 or 60 years career ahead of you, you probably would not be in a hurry to settle down, and you'd probably want to try a few different things out, and you do have the flexibility. So I think we have to accept that it's just a product of the world. I'm not sure that people are becoming less committed. I just think that the whole situation has changed, and people don't come out of education now thinking, okay, I'm going to use what I've learned, I'm going to work hard for 30 years or so, and then I'm going to retire. It's just not the mindset anymore. So how do you approach retention? I think the first one is around understanding what employees want. And right now, flexibility is the top. Flexibility and earning and career progression, these are probably the three things that people want the most. Getting that right is incredibly important. And this transition, especially the transition to flexible working, it's a change process, and it faces resistance, especially from people managers. If you're a department head or a project manager and you're delivering to tight deadlines and your credibility is on the line to deliver, and you're suddenly being told, well, you need to move to more flexible working within your team, that presents a big risk and a big challenge. And it's not surprising that some people managers are completely unprepared and don't know how to do that and need support. And I think so supporting people managers, whether they're a team leader with 2 people or a department head with 200 people, supporting anyone who's managing people to understand, have empathy towards those in their team, and within the realms of what's possible, shape the employee experience and the working environment to work for them is crucial. People want an inclusive working environment. So a lack of diversity or a lack of inclusion, people care about that a lot. And if you have a diverse and inclusive, a diverse team, then it attracts people. If you have an inclusive working environment, then it retains people. And so working hard at that at the team level as well as the organization level is an effective thing to do. Yeah, people have left the sector because of the pace. It's taken too long to get funding or regulatory obstacles, and they're just attracted by faster paced jobs and sectors. So breaking things down, having more regular milestones, keeping it fresh and exciting, and celebrating the successes along the way. It doesn't need to be manufactured. It's just about breaking things down to milestones that keep people engaged and motivated more effectively. And I think that's a lesson across the whole sector, but I think in the new technology coming through, that's already happening, and the pace is much quicker. It's also worth saying that there's high competition from other sectors, especially when it comes to projects, and a single project can affect the balance of the global workforce. So we've seen when the nuclear power plant was being built in the United Arab Emirates, they hired hundreds, if not thousands, of people from other parts of the world. And some plants and some nuclear organizations were really affected by that because they brought people with very rare skills. That's going to happen. And when you've got a big projects happening in attractive locations with low tax or no tax, then that's going to be a challenge. And we've often heard concerns from the decommissioning sector, because when there are new build projects or new technology coming through, people are jumping to the exciting places. And I think we can expect to see more of that. We can expect to see more people jumping from traditional nuclear power organizations to SMR and advanced reactor organizations. And we'll expect to see some pushback and see some measures by the probably the bigger, more traditional employers to make the environment more attractive for people to stay. But I say probably everyone has heard this saying that people don't leave an organization, they leave a manager. And I think it's very true. And the number one thing we can do to improve retention is to support and enable every single person who is managing people. First of all, make sure they have the competencies to manage people, and secondly, give them support and space to provide an environment that people want to stay in. It's focusing on that group of people that are managing people. Policy and organizational strategy, of course it matters, but the lived experience of people within teams is the number one reason why they stay or leave. I'm going to go back one. So we've talked about inclusion and diversity quite a bit. I just wanted to flash this up very briefly in assimilation, the difference between assimilation and inclusion. And this was quite a powerful point that I heard in a lecture a couple of years ago, that assimilation is, yeah, you're welcome to come and join our group, but you need to fit in with us. Inclusion is, yeah, you're welcome to come and join our group, and we'd love to know what you can add to the group and how you can enhance the group and what you can bring that's unique to help the group evolve. And there's a big difference, and many organizations think they're doing inclusion, but what they're actually doing is assimilation. I think anyone who's managing people, this is a really good thing to remember, is that you know, are you inviting people to come in and comply to everything that already exists, or are you inviting people to come in and allowing them to be themselves and add to the environment? So leadership competencies. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to check if there's any more questions. So no more questions in the chat, but feel free to keep the questions coming. Leadership competencies. So we talked about this a bit, but I wanted to go into a bit more detail because it's a point that's so important. And anyone who's starting their career, who has an ambition to come into leadership at some point, or someone who's already in leadership, I'd like to talk a bit about what the nuclear sector needs and values in terms of leadership competencies. Just before I start, I'd like to define leadership. Leadership does not necessarily mean managing people. You could be a leadership in a technical field, or you could be a leadership around a certain product or a thought process, or you could be leading a team. Leadership comes in all different shapes and sizes, and we need everyone. We need people that are leading people, and we also need people that are leading lots of other things that are basically shining lights within their particular field. I already touched on a few of these, but let's go back to some of them. But the main things that we're seeing, and as I said, we have around 30 that we find are the most commonly used, but so many of them are around managing people, or managing change, or managing risk at the moment. And when it comes to people, things like being able to demonstrate an empathetic approach to people, being able to support people's development, being able to manage change and manage people through a change process, being able to manage stakeholders that are on a matrix structure, or stakeholders that are in different organizations, being able to manage people across different locations where some of the people are remote. All of these are kind of people related competencies. Others could be around risk and managing risk and identifying risk, and leadership in either mitigating or supporting others to mitigate risks are huge. So I think, as I said earlier, I wanted to put this up as a separate slide because it's so important now, and I think most organizations have either moved away from or are moving away from this huge list of skills and experience. So it used to be, when we had a job description, we were going back to an organization and challenging them and saying, look, you've got 15 things here that you're saying are essential skills and experience. How many of them are really, really essential to succeed in this role? And normally it comes down to 3 or 4. One of them might often be that they have to have X years experience in the nuclear sector. And I think to the question earlier on about how do we expand the talent pool in areas where there's just literally not enough people, this is how to do it. It's taking the competence approach rather than the skills approach. So most organizations are on that journey, and it's not an easy one. And anyone who's hiring, not just HR practitioners, but anyone who's hiring and leading a team, will need support in moving towards this competence-based approach. Firstly, understanding which skills and experience are absolutely necessary, and secondly, understanding which competencies are critical to success, and then how to go out and find and attract people with those competencies, and then making an accurate assessment on how long will it take them to learn the skills and to gain the experience in order to be up and running and competent. So if there's any questions on leadership, so maybe we can come back to those. But there's another question in the chat from Stephen Mursky. How do nuclear power plant employers overcome the requirement that operations and maintenance staff must be physically located at remote plant sites? This doesn't allow job location flexibility. Yeah, and this was a big discussion point during the pandemic. It was, first of all, there was all this discussion and all this talk about remote working, but for some people it's not possible, and some organizations said, well, for some of our staff it's not possible, so therefore we need to treat everyone fairly, and we can't really have flexibility. As I said earlier, I think every job role needs to be approached differently, and there are shift patterns, but normally they're very fixed. So I think the question is to go back to the operations and the maintenance staff and understand what's important to them. And what does flexibility mean in that role? Because it doesn't have to be just location flexibility, but it could be more intelligent shift patterns that allow them to balance home and family life. And it could actually be the analysis of the job role reveals that flexibility is not possible. You have the optimal working time pattern, and there is an opportunity to do work outside of the location. But actually, having just gone through that assessment and having shown that you care equally about all employees to try and address flexibility will go a long way. But I think people in different roles have different expectations. If you are an operations or maintenance employee and you've always been on site, probably your expectation of working from home is much lower than if you're someone working in marketing or finance, for example. So the expectation will be lower, but just showing that you are giving the same assessment. We have a thing in our business called the flex assessment for a job. So we look at a job and then we ask certain questions to understand where could the flexibility be within that job. Just having looked at it and having paid respect to the fact that you know it's important to people is often enough for people. So I would say taking a job or job family approach to defining flexibility is the way forward. Okay, so practical advice. I'm conscious of the time, so we're going to go fairly quick through these so we have time for a few questions at the end. Yeah, it's very difficult, I think, to plan your career. It's having a direction to head in, and then being ready to change when opportunities and challenges come up is the best way. But whether you're looking to work internationally or whether you're looking to work across the country or stay in the same location, I would always advocate for people to have a direction and some ambitions and some milestones looking in their career, and then be open-minded. What's difficult is when people are really open-minded to everything. Being too open-minded and having too much choice, or being very open-minded, sorry, not too open-minded. There's probably no such thing as being too open-minded, but if you create a lot of choice, then it becomes difficult to really know what you want. And it may be that you only know some things about what you want and some things that you don't want. It may be that you don't want to move to another location. You want to work somewhere within an hour of where you live, and therefore that's a really important thing to know. And then you can start looking at employers in that area, where maybe that you want to work flexibly, or maybe that you want to work on site and you don't want to work remotely. So I think understanding, often when people come to me looking for career advice, I try and help them understand what is important to them. Because people often go straight into the detail and thinking about the job, but actually the best place to start is thinking, okay, where do I want to be? How do I want to feel? What kind of things do I want? What kind of things give me a sense of accomplishment? Do I want deadlines and targets and pressure, or do I want a far more less time pressured environment to work in? These kind of questions can really help. When it comes to international career planning, again, networking is just so important. And I think I would always advocate, someone asked earlier on about salaries in USA and Europe. I would always advocate looking for people that have moved to a country that you're interested in, who've got something in common with. Maybe they've come from a similar educational background, or maybe they've come from the same country or location that you're based, and they've made this move to another location. How did they do it? How did they find it? What happened? What can you learn from them? And I think tools, of course, like LinkedIn and attending webinars like this. Sometimes there's a chat function, or a chat room before or afterwards. Going to conferences, meeting people that have taken a similar journey or similar steps to those that you're thinking is just so important. And it's not everyone likes networking. Not everyone feels comfortable, but my main tip here is, if networking doesn't have to be creating small talk and talking to hundreds of people. If you have a particular question, you should be able to mail someone on LinkedIn, for example, with under 50 words to ask the question. A polite introduction and say, look, I noticed you're from the same state as me and you've moved to this place. I'd love to share experience on how that went for you because I'm considering something similar. That's about 50 words, and someone's they know immediately what you want, and they're highly likely to reply. So reaching out to people has never been easier, but there's also a lot of noise out there. So researching who you're reaching out to, making sure that they can actually offer you something you need, and then being very, very concise in the question you ask about asking for their time to give you their support or guidance. And then mentoring, and there are huge amounts of mentoring programs around the world. Mentoring can seem like a scary word. It does not have to be a formal mentoring program where you're matched to a mentor or mentee. It could be informal, where you just meet people. So I would encourage those that I speak to not see mentoring as a really structured, formal thing, but anyone you talk to through networking who you have a click with, who you have chemistry with, who you have things in common with, that could create a mentor or mentee experience. And also, someone could be a mentor or a mentee. You know, you could be going out there thinking, oh, I'm ready to start mentoring others, but then you start talking to your network and realize that actually there's someone out there that could be a mentor for you. And I think we hear about this term of reverse mentoring, where generally less experienced people are mentoring more experienced people, but in areas that they don't know about. And I think we should just consider mentoring as one relationship where the flow of energy and knowledge can go both ways, and there should always be benefit, and it should be a mutually beneficial relationship. And often a mentor, all they really want is some feedback that they're actually making a difference and adding some value to the person. And mentees, of course, are normally looking to learn, but most people that I meet that have been successful in their career, they always talk about how either formal mentors or informal mentors have been critical to their career development. So I'm conscious of the time, so that's the end of my slides. The practical part we went through quite quickly just because of the time pressure, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions live now. We did have a few come in before, but does anyone else have any questions they want to throw in?
Thank you, Callum. Well, questions are coming in. If you have any more questions, please do go ahead and type those into the questions pane. And while those are coming in, we'll take a quick look at the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled in November, actually the 2nd of November. So a second webinar this week. This one will be on MOOC, the knowledge management method applied to a Gen 4 project, the continuation of a successful story. In December, a presentation on the characterization of U-233 for thorium fuel cycle safeguards. And in January, revolutionizing nuclear engineering education, developing virtual labs for neutron detection, Geiger counter, and reactor experiments.
Great. Exciting. Berta, shall I address one of the questions that came in before?
Sure. There is.
Oh, I see another one coming in here as well.
There is another one that Robert has shared.
Yeah, so let's look at that. I'm of the opinion, Robert says, I'm of the opinion that if regular universities would offer nuclear minors, this would flood the nuclear industry with needed talent. Can you comment? Well, it would. Yes, I think I agree, because it would actually open people's eyes to what's happening within the sector, and I think that's the main challenge. Is people might come out of relevant degrees in the STEM areas and have no knowledge of nuclear sector at all. It's interesting that in Europe, the country that creates the most nuclear graduates is Italy, and Italy has no nuclear sector anymore. It's just seen as a very credible degree course that you can then do other things with. So it's fascinating how that has developed. So I totally agree that if there were more nuclear minors, then it would raise awareness, and when awareness is raised, people would realize the benefit that comes from nuclear applications, and it would massively increase the talent. I think it's a great idea. It relates a little bit to one of the questions that came in before about how do you broaden the talent pool? How do we cast a broader net for roles, especially for those roles with very specific job titles? And I think it was about nuclear materials was talked about. I think it doesn't matter how far you advertise a nuclear materials role. Nearly everyone reading it is not going to understand it. So either we need to make the language more accessible in the job title, or we need to create a job role that's maybe develops people into that role, which is a bit more understandable and would maybe compare with roles advertised in other technical sectors that that people would find, because no one's ever going to search for a nuclear materials role. So I think that looking at the language is one thing we can do. The other thing we can do is actually physically go out and talk to people and approach them rather than waiting for them to come to us. We've got a minute left and another question come in. So the question is, some interdisciplinary areas offer great competition for nuclear employment. For example, IT, INC, systems engineering, mechanical, civil, electrical, etc. We need to offer a more attractive message than other industries. Yeah, absolutely, because we are competing with others. And I think this is where I think if we're in the energy sector, I think nuclear medicine has this huge purpose. So I think that has one way to attract people. But if you're anything to do with nuclear power or creating heat with nuclear reactors, then it's playing on this decarbonisation and clean energy and net zero. People want to change the world and support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So linking the roles that exist to that. Why would you want to be an INC engineer in the oil and gas industry when ultimately there is a much bigger industry growing that is actually doing the same thing and also solving one of the world's biggest challenges at the same time? So we absolutely do have to compete, and it's not always easy. I mean, the reason my company Thomas Thor exists is because it's not easy. Our entire business is around going out and finding people and bringing talent to the sector, as well as helping people move up within the sector. We're also, half the work we do is bringing people from other sectors into nuclear. So I didn't mean to finish on a plug there for Thomas Thor, but that seems to be how it's worked out. So sorry, Berta. I think we're out of time, right?
We have time. If you have time, you've been very gracious with your expertise and your time and your knowledge, and we appreciate that very much. So I think it depends on your availability and whether there are still questions to come in.
There's one question actually.
It's been a great pleasure working with you, and I appreciate the time and the dedication that you have given to the GIF.
Thank you, Berta, and thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes. And there's a question that came in before that I thought was really interesting. It was around the risk of overstaffing, the risk of hiring too many people in anticipation of this huge growth, and then the growth doesn't come. And I think that question was, the context of that question was, it's happened before. You know, that there's been some growth spurts or growth periods in the nuclear sector workforce, and then things haven't happened as quickly. How do we see that risk in the future? I think there's a couple of things to say there. I think a lot of the jobs in nuclear are very, very transferable to others. People headhunt those from the nuclear sector because they know of the level of quality and the standards within the sector. So if you are an engineer or a technician or a project manager, and you want to start your career or work somewhere where you're going to have like a gold standard experience, then nuclear is a good place to come. So, you know, a lot of people would work in nuclear for a period specifically because it would then be extremely transferable to other sectors. So I think if there is any overstaffing, then people wouldn't have to worry about their career because they would be very attractive to other sectors. I actually don't see the overstaffing being such a challenge now. I think the last kind of growth of the nuclear sector that stalled a bit was in the 2000s, and it was mainly because it was probably the concern about climate change wasn't so great then, and so it didn't sustain, and it didn't happen quickly enough. It never went away, but it just never happened. The growth never happened quickly enough. Now there are two reasons for the growth of the nuclear sector, certainly the nuclear energy sector. Number one is we need to address climate change, and we need to create carbon-free energy. And the second one is we need energy security. We do not want to be relying on other countries and fragile supply chains and geopolitical risk when it comes to creating energy for our inhabitants. So And this one is probably the more powerful one right now for governments. So governments are now investing in nuclear because they want energy security and because they and because they want to address climate change. And the two together are so strong that I think this is going to be the start of a 3-decade huge growth period for the nuclear sector. So I personally don't think overhiring will be a big challenge.
Thank you.
Okay.
I've had a question come in through email during the presentation regarding the attendee list. We value your privacy, so attendee contact information is something that we guard closely. If you are willing to share your contact information, you're an attendee on this webinar, go ahead and type in the chat or send me a note that you're willing to have that information shared and I'll forward it. But if I don't hear directly from people who are willing to have their contact information shared, I will not share that with the other attendees. So again, if you're willing to share and your contact information, send me a note or type it in the chat that yes, you will, and I'll share that with the person who's asked. But otherwise, out of concern of people's privacy, we guard that very carefully. We don't want people ending up on spam lists, that type of thing. So I don't willingly give that out easily. So I leave that up to individuals. If you'll let me know, then I'll share. Thanks.
Just Berta, for the record, I'm obviously happy for if anyone has any follow-up questions, then my email address is on the slide, but if anyone wants to email me or call me anytime, then I'm very, very happy to receive any other questions or have a conversation.
Thank you. And we have your contact information. Your email is on the Meet the Presenter slide. So if people have that, they know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah.
There is one more question, last minute question or comment, I guess, that has come in.
I just saw that. Yeah. So it's a very good point from Stephen that nuclear power is not just for electricity. It's also producing hydrogen, salinating water, cogen with wind and solar, and producing green steel, etc. It's a good point. And when I say nuclear energy, I guess I mean it could then have be an application or be used for any of these other sources. And you just have to look at some of the new technology being developed to decarbonize industries like steel and also shipping and transport and those kind of things. So it's not just energy, it's not just electricity, it's all these other things as well, which is basically decarbonizing. So maybe we should really just talk about decarbonizing and having a clean energy and a clean industries that are not producing CO2. So it's a very good point.
Thank you. Tricia, do you have any closing thoughts?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Sorry, Berta, I was on mute and I could not find my button. So it was a very good presentation. Thank you so much, Callum. As you know, and as a former professor in this field, it is always a challenge to have the workforce. And as a former group leader, I was a group leader until, let's say June 2023. Very difficult to hire, and if you hire, very difficult to maintain and retain the workforce. And sometimes you hire too much, as you explained, and the funding doesn't come. So it's a very challenging time always for people who are training or recruiting and maintaining the workforce. And of course, like you said, there is always this gap between the junior workforce and the one who are retiring. And we see that. I remember Greg Chopin in the 1980s wrote a very good report on that, on what he was seeing, and it's let's say 40 years later, and we still see that. So thank you very much, Callum. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much also, Berta, and thank you to everyone. who participated in this webinar. And it is recorded and it will be archived on the GIVE website. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Beth. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. And I look forward to following up the conversation with anyone that would like to.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.